Okay, so our next speaker is Christina Irving. She is licensed clinical social worker at Family Caregiver Alliance. One of my absolute favorite speakers to talk about caregiving issues and challenges of dealing with dementia and psychosis. And if people here in the room and people on Zoom do not know about Family Caregiver Alliance, you absolutely should. The URL is caregiver.org, so easy to remember. Everybody needs to know about this organization, so take it away.
Thanks, Robin. And while we're trying to get the slides up, I'll maybe just give a quick, I had it at the end, but I'm going to give a quick overview of Family Caregiver Alliance. So we're a nonprofit. We've been around for over 40 years, and our role really is to support family caregivers. We're based in San Francisco, and we serve the 6 counties in the Bay Area, but we are one of 11 caregiver resource centers in California. So anywhere in the state that you live, there is a caregiver resource center that provides support. So we do a lot of assessment and care planning with families to help them figure out, what do you do? How are you doing? What's happening with the person you're caring for, and helping people navigate through kind of the long-term care world, because we know that's a mess most of the time, not easy to figure out what's available, what do you actually qualify for, and what are the services that might be useful for you. And then we do a lot of education programs. We have some funds for short-term respite grants to help families get a break, and then support groups and trying to connect people to other resources. So like the Brain Support Network, like the Parkinson's support groups, really trying to help people figure out what's available in the community. So I'm going to talk a little bit.
There you go. All right.
the IT portion of everyone's job these days. So I'm going to talk about kind of dementia communication. And, as Dr. Poston said, everyone's brain's a little different. What the dementia might look like is going to be a little bit different per person. So I'm going to talk about it kind of in these overarching kind of principles and ideas, and then how you actually apply them to the person that you're caring for might vary. What that actually looks like for you is going to depend on what symptoms they're having, what part of the disease they're in, what the progression looks like, a little bit of just their personality and who they are. Some people just tend to be more agreeable. Other people, you get a little bit more stubborn and resistance, and that's going to make things more difficult. But we're going to talk about some of the overall principles for communication, and then a few specific kind of more challenging behaviors and scenarios. So we'll talk more about hallucinations and delusions. And when you see those as a family member, as a friend, how do you actually respond and communicate with somebody? All right. So we talked about this already, about some of the symptoms that we see in Lewy body dementia. And I'm not going to go through a lot of these because you had them already. But what we're going to focus more today is on some of these more dementia symptoms. What does that actually look like, and how do you respond and communicate? A little bit around that fluctuating cognition, because that is, as Dr. Poston said, one of the things that is most challenging for families. And then again, the hallucinations and delusions. But these other areas are really important because it does affect how you communicate with somebody and what the things that are challenging might be. If somebody's having more Parkinson's symptoms, more physical symptoms, maybe just other medical conditions, somebody whose mobility might be more impaired, well, we don't think of that as affecting cognition. It is probably going to impact how you communicate with them. It's going to impact the things that you're worried about and safety concerns. So, when we think about dementia communication, it's the whole person. It's not just what's going on in their brain, but it's all the parts of who they are, who's involved, what the living environment looks like. So we'll try and touch on all of that. So you saw some very complicated brain slides earlier. This is going to be the opposite of that. This is the social work perspective. So very simple brain. But we often think about dementia as memory. As you heard earlier, that may not be the most difficult symptom. There may not be as many memory symptoms when we're talking about Lewy body, but it does affect the whole brain. What parts depend again on the progression, where someone's at. Is this just strictly Lewy body? Is it also Alzheimer's? Is there something else going on? The challenge, I think, for families is you're looking at the person, and this may be somebody you've known your whole life if you're caring for a parent. If it's a spouse or a partner, it might be somebody you've known for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and you're looking at them and they look the same. because we can't see what's happening inside the brain, and we don't know exactly what parts of the brain are impacted. And so it's hard for us to know, well, how do we adjust and adapt based on the changes that are happening? And at some point, all these different areas can be affected. It can be that executive functioning, the logic, the reasoning, abstract thinking, critical thinking, the spatial and depth perception of not knowing how far down that chair is, how far down that step is, how far away is you or the wall. It can be changes in taste and touch and smell, in language. Again, not all of them are going to be the same for every person, but we want to have the sense of like everything that's going on in the brain is what we see presented in that person. We just don't see what's happening inside. If we could tell, it'd still be difficult, but it would be a little easier to adjust because we could see what parts of the brain, oh, that one's not working so well right now. Okay, I need to adapt to that. But we don't know that. So when we think about cognitive changes, again, memory loss may not be as severe for someone. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And depending again on what stage someone's at, it may not be as noticeable. That can make it harder sometimes for other people in your life to recognize what's going on with your loved one. Because we have this picture, I think just in society, of dementia means memory loss. And if that's not what's going on, then other people might think, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. They seem fine to me. And your reality at home might look very, very different. So there are often more changes in ability to reason, in focus and understanding and attention. And sometimes that also can make it seem like it's memory loss. Because, and this is true for all of us, you don't have to have dementia, but if you're not paying attention very well, you're not going to remember it very well. And so if somebody's having more trouble with focus and attention, they may not remember the things that you said because they didn't really take them in to begin with. So sometimes we'll see things that look more like memory loss, and it's not necessarily that they're unable to remember, but their ability to really take in, process, store, and focus on what you've said or what's going on may be more impaired. So it can be hard to tease that out sometimes, but when we think about communication, there's ways that we can adjust and adapt to that. But it does mean that the way we used to communicate may not work so well. The comments as we're going out the door of don't forget to take your medication, I'll see you a little bit later, may not work because someone really wasn't able to tune into what we said. So our kind of more intuitive, natural way of communicating that sometimes is offhand comments, it's side discussions, are going to be much, much harder for somebody when we see some of these cognitive changes. As you heard earlier, the fluctuation in the cognitive abilities, day to day, hour by hour, kind of the ups and downs, it means it's really hard for families and friends to know what to expect. What can I expect this person to be able to do? What can I expect them to be able to remember? What am I going to see in terms of behaviors? That's going to vary depending on moment to moment. And what we also hear sometimes and from families is worry of, okay, are they faking it? Because they could do this earlier today and now they're saying they can't. And then suddenly they can again. And it leaves sometimes families feeling like, okay, what's real? Like what actually is the reality of our day-to-day life? And so it's remembering, as hard as it is, that is a part of the disease. And it's not somebody trying to make our lives harder, even if the end result might be, it feels like it makes your life harder. But it's realizing that that's part of the dementia, is that fluctuation. There's a couple dementia trainers that I've seen that talk about dementia in terms of improv skills. And that the better you are at improv, probably the better you are at dementia communication because you're able to adjust and go with the flow. Not something most of us get training on, but to think about that is how do I kind of meet that person where they are moment to moment, knowing that that is going to change frequently. So again, we're going to talk about dementia communication and these overarching principles because how we apply them, again, depends on the person, your relationship, the stage of their dementia, and what symptoms that they have. But the first part really is key, which I think is so important of having Dr. Post's presentation that really kind of gives you that overview of what it is that it's really important to understand what is and isn't possible to change. What's the reality of their diagnosis? What's the reality of what's happening within their brain? We can't do anything about that. What we can control is how we interact, communicate, and engage with the person. And we may see that some of those symptoms, some of those challenges either get better or worse, but we can't change what's happening with the disease itself. And again, because we don't see what's happening inside the brain, it makes it really hard for us to know what can I control, what's happening, what can they do, what can't they do. So it's such a hard thing, but to really understand, we can't control that other person and what's going on in their brain. All we control is how we interact, how we communicate, how we engage with somebody. And the second kind of overarching principle is to understand that our thoughts, our attitudes, our actions have a huge impact on the person with dementia. How do you think it feels to have dementia? If you want to think about it, what does that feel like? Often kind of scary, uncertain, people feeling just on edge, not knowing what's going on, what's happening next, what am I supposed to do? That loss of control, and sometimes that loss of independence of, I don't control my life in the same way that I used to. And so often the person with dementia is looking to the world around them for cues of, what should I be doing? What's going on? Is this safe? Is this comfortable? And understandably, as caregivers, as family, like, you are doing usually a million things during the day. You have this massively long to-do list of things that you're trying to make happen. And sometimes with people with dementia, they're not necessarily able to put themselves in your shoes and understand what you're going through. Be like, oh, well, you just seem really stressed because, yeah, you're really busy and we're late for our doctor's appointment. And, I haven't been able to kind of get ready as quickly yet today. So I get why you're stressed. They may not be able to do that. That's some of the executive functioning. That's some of the critical thinking skills that might not be possible for someone. But all they can feel is this maybe stress and anxiety. And it's like, okay, well, if you're stressed, should I be stressed? Like, what's going on? What's happening right now? And so often people with dementia will pick up on our attitude, our feelings. They may not be able to articulate them. They may not always know where it's coming from, but they will feel it. And so, again, much easier said than done to say, let's be calm, let's be patient, and always in a good mood. Not always going to happen, but realizing that sometimes that's what might be one of those triggers. That's what might be picked up on by the person with dementia, is kind of what we're bringing into that interaction. And related to that is that behavior has a purpose. Doesn't always make sense to us. Again, our brains are working different than their brains. So there are sometimes things that people will do that we're like, oh, I don't really get where that is coming from, but there is a reason for it. There is something going on that is making somebody say, this is what I need to be doing. Maybe it's they're seeing something that's not there, thinking about something that isn't real. It might be kind of that anxiousness, might be kind of the visual changes. And at the end of the day, realizing that that personal connection is more important than anything else, more important than the content of any conversation, more important than whether somebody remembers exactly who a person is or can identify them or remember the relationship. It is about that connection. Because if there's memory loss, they may not remember what was said. It might be, again, more attention that they can't really track it and follow it. So you're not going to be able to kind of hold a long conversation about, current events or what's going on in the world. But that connection to you, to other people in their life, is something that people will hold on to. I had a client one time, she was caring for her mom, and I don't think they knew what type of dementia it was, but she said it was not a good day. They were just having a really hard time. She's like, I know I wasn't patient. I was stressed. She's like, my mom was then kind of getting a little irritable and snippy with me. And she's like, I finally just had to go outside for a few minutes. She's like, take a couple of deep breaths. She's like, then I came back in and was like, hey, Mom, it's so good to see you. And her mom was like, I'm glad you're here. That other woman was so mean. So obviously a little bit more memory loss there, but also, again, just that sense of the person, of that connection and the relationship and what we bring into those interactions, but also realizing that we can't hit the reset button. So when there's a day that it's like, okay, this is not a good space, this is not a good day, we can do those things to try and help us reset it. and figure out, okay, what do I need to come back to? How do I need to change this and do it a little differently this time? And let's see if we get a different result. So some of these tips related to that, kind of reassurance is huge. Again, when we think about what does it feel like to have dementia and it feeling anxiety provoking and kind of worrisome, and you just don't feel like you've got the ground under your feet in the same way, kind of that reassurance, whether it's verbal, physical, something to know that I am with you, you are okay, we're going to make sure you are safe, you've got what you need during the day, you're doing everything you need to be doing, I still care about you, you're still important as a person. That reassurance can be huge. Again, remaining calm, easier said than done depending on the moment, but finding ways to help center yourself, make sure that you're getting support, trying to get breaks, having those moments where you can. Definitely had a few clients said they would go into the car and that's where they would just take a moment and scream because no one could hear them there, and then could come back in and be like, all right, now let me come back to the rest of my life. Not arguing. Again, very hard one, I think, especially depending on your relationship with the person you're caring for. But either somebody is not going to remember what you said, not going to maybe fully understand, especially long arguments, when I want to give you a really long explanation as to why I'm right and why you were wrong. And that, no, I did tell you that we had a doctor's appointment today and that we needed to leave by this time because there's traffic. That's more than someone's going to be able to remember, kind of comprehend. And all it's going to do is then start to make them more frustrated because they're not understanding things the same way you are. If there's something someone doesn't want to do, and you're like, well, no. The doctor said you need to take this medication today. No. It's not necessary. Well, no, this is why you need to take it. Again, we're using logic, we're using reasoning, we're doing it based on our memory, our understanding of the situation may or may not match theirs. We are not going to win that argument. So we have to kind of find ways around it and be sometimes a little bit more indirect. Giving compliments. That need to feel good about yourself, to feel like you have usefulness and purpose and meaning, that does not go away with dementia. If anything, that increases because people aren't able to do all the same things that they used to do. So how to let someone know that they're doing well, they look nice today, you care about them, you're glad they're here, something to help make somebody feel good about themselves. They don't have to be empty compliments, but why are you here? Why are you with them? Why are you caring for them? Reminding people of that. Really responding to feelings. Again, content, things that people say may not always fully make sense, but what's the feeling underneath it? And responding to that feeling sometimes more than the words. And that can be helpful when we don't know what to say. When someone says something, we're like, is that real? Is that what they're actually thinking? Did they mean that? And it can take us a second to be like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. This has never happened before. Can we identify kind of what the feeling is? Are they anxious? Are they frustrated with something? Are they happy in sharing something? It may not make sense to us, but are they happy about it? Go to the feelings. Using distractions can be really helpful and important. The thing with distractions, though, is we need to connect with the person first. So if they're saying something, seeing something that's not there, believing something that's not happening, and we're like, okay, I need to shift their focus. We need to get them off of this thing that they're perseverating on or ruminating on right now. We need to shift into something else. We need to acknowledge what they're feeling and thinking and needing. But then, yes, we might be able to use distractions, help them get involved in another activity, ask them for help with something. Moving into another room can actually be useful. In the same way that we sometimes forget why we walked into a room once we got in there, the visual cue of what we were thinking about is suddenly gone. That can be helpful with someone with dementia as well. So we're going to talk about whatever you're bringing up, and then we're just going to, while we do that, can I get your help in this room? And we walk into the other room, and we might kind of help reset whatever they're thinking about in that moment. It's okay to alter the truth. This is hard for some people, and you don't have to do it the same way, but to realize that our goal is to join in their reality, to meet them where they are. Doesn't mean that we have to kind of tell out and out lies if that's not something you're comfortable with, but how do we meet them where they are and make that connection with them? Avoid asking questions that rely on short-term memory. So even if memory problems are not like the biggest symptom, they're not super problematic. Again, if we know that sometimes people are having trouble with attention and focus, and so just may not be taking in what we're saying, if I then ask you, what did you have for breakfast this morning? What did you think about what the doctor said a few minutes ago? Well, we don't know if they took all that in, and it puts somebody on the spot sometimes to feel like, well, now I need to give you an answer. And I may not really know how to answer that. So we can kind of have those discussions, share what we're thinking about, kind of see then where they are and what they can remember. But as opposed to feeling like we're grilling somebody, like, gee, you remember, I need to test you on what your memory is. And trying to break down tasks for people. Again, how do we simplify things? We want people to be as independent as they can be. We want people to do everything they can do. But we may not be able to give them the long string of directions that we might have before. All right, so we're gonna head out the door. I want you to, can you go upstairs and grab your jacket and put your shoes on? And then I'm gonna go get my purse, and then we're gonna meet out the car. Just don't forget to lock the door behind you. Most people are not gonna be able to do that. We want somebody to do as much as they can. We want somebody to feel like they're part of our world still, part of our routine, but we need to kind of simplify and shorten things for people. So all of this is things that like we have to do differently. It's how do we change and alter our communication, alter our interactions. And again, that can be really, really hard. Sometimes what also makes it hard is how we think about it. And all of this is totally understandable and normal, all of these thoughts, but sometimes they can make our lives actually a little bit harder. So that feeling of, well, they know better. They could do that yesterday. They could do that an hour ago. They're not doing as much as they could be doing. That must be on purpose because they know better than that. They're not listening clearly enough. I answered that question already. And then I think the ones of like, they don't say thank you. They don't acknowledge kind of what my role is, how much I'm doing for them. Again, all understandable where these thoughts come from, all very kind of normal, and they make sense given how challenging and stressful caregiving can be. But they often can make it harder for us because it feeds into this idea of, well, this is not how things were supposed to be. And it's like, no, they're not. This is not what we wanted it to be like. This is not how it was before. And yet it is not as it was before. Their brain is not the same as it was before. So when you have a lot of these thoughts that are coming up, acknowledge them, that it's like, yeah, this is frustrating. They could do it an hour ago. That's really hard. I wish that wasn't the case. But then it's like, okay, this is the reality of the diagnosis. This is the reality of the disease. How do I cope with that? How do I deal with that? Are there things that I can do differently? Is there support that I need that I'm not currently getting? Are there other people that could help to give me some time away so that I'm not the one feeling like I'm hearing the same thing over and over again? So when we think about some of the more challenging behaviors, again, I'm going to talk about this in kind of big umbrella terms, just not knowing again what each person's situation is, what each diagnosis is. But, some of the things that come up that people say, oh, this is really difficult. The first thing we actually want to think about, it's like, is this a problem for them or is this a problem for me? Even hallucinations may not be a problem for them. May be really upsetting to us because it's an indicator of what's going on and it's a sign of the diagnosis. And that might just emotionally be very hard for us to deal with. May not be a problem for them. So we want to kind of make that distinction of, is this just something that is hard for me, or is this something that's a real safety concern? This is something that's distressing for them, because we're going to respond differently. We're going to address it in different ways. If it's just, hey, this is hard for me and I don't like this, it may be, again, I need more support. I need to be able to talk about this. I need to be able to have some time away. Things like the REM sleep, where maybe it's not a problem for them, no safety issues for them, safety issues for us, then yes, that is a problem. That is something we want to deal with. But again, how we address this is going to be different depending on really who is it a problem for. And at the end of the day, realizing that we cannot change that person. So we want to look at how do we accommodate and adapt to the behaviors, to the communication changes, as opposed to I'm going to try and control and change them and say, no, I want you to do this differently. It's like, they're doing what their brain is allowing them to do. Definitely talk with a doctor, especially for sudden changes. If you see anything where it's like, oh, that's really new and different, you want to make sure it's not an underlying medical issue. It's not something else going on that could be treated. But it is that recognition that behavior has a purpose. And then having that flexibility to know that what worked today may not work tomorrow, but it may work the next day. So when you're looking at kind of different communication skills, different kind of ways to manage behavior, you want to think about like as many ideas as you can have, because you want to be able to pull from them as needed, because of either the fluctuations in cognition, because of just where someone's at as the dementia changes. Those skills and tips that you use are going to vary in terms of how effective they are. And then I really think more important than anything else is having support from other people. The things I hear in caregiver support groups are often the things that I then share with other caregivers. Everyone in this room has expertise of working and caring for someone with dementia because you've been doing it. I think we tend to pay attention to the things that aren't going well. So we tend to remember the times where we got more impatient, or it's like, oh, that got them really upset. That was not a good one. We tend to remember those things, and you don't pay as close attention to the things that it's like, oh yeah, that was successful. That was a good day. That was a good afternoon. This is what we did and how that worked well. But I think we're good about sharing those ideas with other people when they're facing stressors. So I think caregiver support groups can be such a useful way. And I hope for the people in the room that when we have lunch, you're able to talk. If you're online, share ideas with each other as well, but just to be able to pass on what you've learned, because somebody else will benefit from that. So when we think about behavior having a purpose and things that, again, people might do, it's like, oh, that made no sense to me. One of the examples that always comes to mind, and it was from a class that we were doing, and there was a caregiver who said she woke up in the middle of the night, heard a noise. Her husband had dementia. She goes into the bathroom and she sees him in there, and he's standing on the bathroom counter, urinating into the sink. And she's like, well, that doesn't seem good. There's some safety issues with that. There's some sanitation issues with that. Like, why would he do that? Where did that come from? And something she's like, there's no rationale for that. And when we talked about it, it was like, well, was the light on or off in the bathroom? She's like, well, it was off, because there's enough like kind of light from outside we could see. She's like, but still, why would he climb onto the counter? And I was like, well, was the toilet lid closed? And she's like, yeah. She's like, but still, why would you step up onto that, then step up onto the counter? And then suddenly it dawned on her, she's like, he grew up in a very rural area that had outhouses. She's like, he was used to climbing up steps to get to the toilet in the middle of the night. So waking up in the middle of the night, not thinking as clearly, a little bit groggier, and you walk into a dim bathroom and you see what looks like 2 steps and an open bowl. And there he went. So things that don't always make sense to us often have a reason behind it. There's something going on that makes sense to that person. And if we can identify and figure that out, then we can say, okay, what can I do differently? Night light in the bathroom, keep that toilet lid open, how to make it so that that doesn't happen again. So we're not changing the person, but we're accommodating kind of where their mind might be going and what might be coming up for them. And we're making changes to adapt and adjust to that. So sometimes people are looking for things that are familiar, looking for things that feel safe and comfortable. They might be looking for something to do. That idea of apathy, of somebody just, nothing really sounds interesting, nothing sounds good to do. That also can be a part of dementia, of that abstract thinking. That if you were to suggest, do we want to go to the movies? Well, I have to think about, what are movie theaters like? Do I enjoy sitting there? What's the movie? Do I remember what it is? Am I going to want to sit there for 2 hours? There's a lot that we think through. We do it kind of naturally. And so it's pulling from our long-term memory, but it's also that part of the brain that says, let me think about something that's not present in front of me right now and think about whether I would enjoy that. And so that's some of the executive functioning that can be more challenging for people. Do they have physical needs? Do they need to go to the bathroom and maybe aren't sure what that sensation is? And we see that in later stages of dementia where people aren't always able to kind of understand what they're feeling in their body, or they're not able to articulate it and tell us that. And that can be true with pain as well. Pain can sometimes be very undertreated because people aren't able to say, this hurts. This is what's going on. Sometimes it's people are wanting to express fear, anger, a loss of control, kind of tell us, I don't like how things are going right now. I don't like what you're doing. But that can be harder for people to kind of put together in their mind in a logical, straightforward way. So it might come out more in these behaviors, in this resistance, in this kind of anger, or what we often think of as like agitation. It often is anxiety, feeling of loss of control, feeling frustrated. And so if we can figure out where's that coming from, is it something we did? Is it something that they're needing? So some of our kind of common pitfalls is this feeling of the need to be reasonable and rational and logical. I want to explain things to you. I want you to understand them, because then I think you'll agree with me. And that may not work so well. If logic and reasoning is harder for someone than trying to give an explanation of this is why you need to do this right now, or this is what's actually going on, may not work so well. People with dementia don't necessarily need to be grounded in reality. We'll talk about hallucinations and right after this, but if somebody's remembering things differently, how do I join in their reality? Again, it's much more important, the connection, than the content. So how do we maintain that connection? Making agreements, not necessarily going to work. Again, either someone has to remember it, they have to fully have paid attention to it, they have to agree to it, they have to be able to recall that in that correct moment. I think the one that I see come up around this most often, and I know this can be particularly problematic when there is that kind of changes in blood pressure when people stand and there's worry about falls. It's like, okay, I don't want you to stand up too quickly, or I need you to wait to stand until I'm with you. Someone's not necessarily going to remember that. So that making of an agreement may not work. And we have to figure out, okay, how do I adjust to that concern around safety? Because I can't necessarily expect that they're going to recall those agreements. And I think particularly this last one is so true around Lewy body, which is that it's so easy to overestimate and underestimate what someone can do. True with dementia in general, but especially when you have this fluctuation. Because again, what someone could do in the morning and what they can do a little bit later in the day might look very different. And so we're just kind of having to adjust and go with it and figure out, it's like, oh, sorry, you could do that yourself. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step in. I'll let you go ahead. Or I kind of get somebody started and see, okay, they don't know what to do next. All right, let me step in a little bit more. And so we have to find that way, which again, hard to do, to be flexible with making those adjustments. So kind of hallucinations and delusions, and again, this varies, I think, so much depending on the person, depending on what stage they're at. When it's something, I can talk about this first, where they see it in the room, and again, it's more of I'm misinterpreting what I'm seeing. We want to think about, are there ways that we can, again, adjust for that? Do we need to look at different lighting? Do we need to make sure that we're putting things away? Because then there's less clutter, there's less for them to potentially misinterpret, can help minimize those. Again, people may or may not recognize that something they're seeing isn't actually there. They may or may not recognize that certain beliefs that they have are true or not true. So if somebody's questioning it, if they're asking you, do you see those kids over there? And we can honestly answer, I'm not seeing them. So something you're seeing right now. We don't want to tell them, no, you're wrong, they are not there. That is real for somebody. That is what they are seeing. And if they really feel that, and they're not asking, they're just like, oh, look at those kids. Interesting. It's about time for dinner. They should be getting home soon. They're not asking us, do you see this too? They're not questioning it. We don't necessarily have to reinforcement. It's like, oh yeah, I see them. They look, look at them, how cute they are. But we also don't have to say, no, you're wrong. They're not there. but just be like, yep, you know, it is about time for dinner. You know what, let me make sure everyone's getting where they need to go. Can you help me in the other room while I take care of that? You know, while I make sure that the place is safe. If it's not bothering somebody though, it's not bothering them. Again, that might be more of a problem for us than for them. But if it's something that's distressing, again, what's that feeling underneath it? Which is, there's maybe people in my space, there's animals in my space, I don't want them here, this doesn't feel like it's a safe or comfortable situation. Then we can provide that reassurance. You know what? I'm going to make sure everything's okay. I'm going to make sure no one's here that shouldn't be here. We're going to make sure it's all right. So we don't necessarily have to reinforce or contradict them, but we're meeting kind of that underlying need and that feeling. But if it's not distressing, then we kind of can just let it go. I was working in a inpatient hospice unit at one point, and there was somebody who was having hallucinations, and I came into the room, and he was like, can you tell what they're doing over there? And I was like, no, I don't. What did, you know, tell me what you're seeing. And he described a little bit of a scenario, and I was like, is that bothering you? And he's like, no. I'm like, okay, let me know. Let me know if something's bothering you. But in that moment, he was watching it. He was fine with it. Didn't really have an awareness that what he was seeing might not be there. And we're like, okay, if anything changes, you let me know, and we'll make sure we can take care of it for you. But otherwise, just to be able to go with it. Again, to kind of meet them in their reality, meet them in the underlying feelings and the needs. And then we can look at, how do we redirect? How do we distract? Can we move into another room? But again, we have to meet them where they're at first, acknowledge kind of those feelings, acknowledge the need, acknowledge what they're bringing up. And then we might look at, can we move into another space? And will that help kind of reset what they're seeing right then? So changes you can make. The more you can simplify the environment, the better. That can help with some of those illusions of seeing things that might not quite be what they think they are. It can make it easier for someone to navigate safely, especially if there's any physical or mobility symptoms. It can also just help with some of the overstimulation. Again, when there's difficulty with focus and attention, the more there is around somebody, the harder it is for them to know where they need to go. And that's the same with kind of simplifying tasks, having a routine, and allowing some of that rest in between. You know, it's a lot more work for somebody to try and navigate their world than it might be for us. So giving people some downtime and some rest. Using labels or cues. So some of that can be visual labels. You know, if somebody's not quite remembering where things are or what steps, you might try those. Again, it depends on if that's an issue for people. For others, again, that attention and focus, you could put a label there. They could walk right by it because they're not going to pay attention to it at all. So it's an easy thing to try, especially if you want somebody to be able to, you know, do things in their kitchen themselves. But again, depends on the brain, depends on the person. For some people that works super well. Others, like, the note's not even there because I'm just not going to pay attention to it. Thinking about, again, if somebody is still very mobile and they're wondering if they might kind of leave on their own, if they might kind of get into things that maybe they shouldn't, think about kind of the safety of the environment. Do you need door alarms for somebody who might, you know, say, I'm going to go for a walk right now? And I don't see a problem with that it's, you know, 11 o'clock at night and I might have a little bit of physical instability. Let's just go for that. Or I'm going to, you know, go downstairs on my own, and maybe that's not a safe thing to do. So we don't want to kind of constrain people. Things like door alarms, motion sensor lights can be really helpful to kind of just maintain that physical safety. And really look at lighting. You know, you can get now those like stick-on lights that are motion sensor, so that they don't come on all the time, but will come on when somebody's walking by. So especially if somebody is kind of maybe up and down in the middle of the night. I'll also say around changes you can make, you know, if sleep is a problem, you know, many people will think about at least separate beds, if not separate rooms. You might have two beds that are kind of close together, and then depending on the night, you might push them a little farther apart if needed. But just to make sure that, like, you're safe as well and well taken care of. And then when we think about communicating with someone with dementia, I mean, really that overall piece is we want to acknowledge and build on what they can do. So we talk a lot with dementia about all the deficits, of all the changes, the things that somebody can no longer do. But how do we also acknowledge maybe personality traits they still have, hobbies they still have, things that they're still capable of doing, things that we enjoy, and how do we make sure that we're focusing on that also? So it's this idea of holding on and letting go. How do we let go of the things that maybe aren't possible anymore or have changed, or some of our expectations about what we thought this period of our life would look like? But how do we hold on to the parts that are still there? The parts of the relationship, parts of themselves, the things that are still important to them. Being patient, understanding, and creative, again, much easier said than done when you're a caregiver and you're trying to take care of everything, especially if you're not getting good sleep at night. It is so much harder to be patient and understanding and creative. So it's, how do we do that? What support do you need to help you feel better able to do that? How do you kind of get more creative? And that's a lot of, again, learning from other people, talking to other caregivers. What have they tried? That can make a difference. And again, realizing that you can hit that reset button at any point in a day. So if you feel like, okay, this is not going well, okay, how do I take a step back, take a deep breath, put on some music for a moment, watch a funny video online, whatever it is that gives you that moment of de-stress, and then to go back in. And finding ways to find the joy and the fun in even the little things, so that it doesn't feel like it's one task after next. But how do you insert into the day just a little bit of time that lets you feel like, here's something good in our life. Here's something that I enjoy about the person, or something else in my life that is good and happy that I want to focus on and remember. We tend to think about all the things that we didn't get done, that never-ending to-do list that we maybe didn't check anything off of. But I was in a hotel one time actually doing some classes for caregivers of veterans, and the little notepad next to the phone, it said accomplished list. Feels much better than a to-do list, doesn't it? And I think especially for caregivers, that's so real, because all the things that you just naturally have to do during the day, you don't tend to acknowledge. You know, what did you have to get done before you could even get here? But all we think about is all the stuff that hasn't happened or that didn't go right. So kind of really giving yourself credit for what you are doing, how much care you are providing, kind of acknowledging that for yourself. And if you have a hard time doing it for yourself, then find someone who can do it for you and kind of give you that credit and that acknowledgement. I've got some resources that are on here. I mean, obviously, hopefully you know, because you're all here, the resources through the Brain Support Network. If you are providing more kind of hands-on care, and particularly if you're starting to have to do more like medical types of tasks, AARP and the Home Alone Alliance have a whole series of how-to videos that are really good. There's some great videos through the Lewy Body Dementia Association, and I just realized actually now the film Spark about Robin Williams is available for people to watch at any point. So if you haven't seen that, great. 24-hour helpline is through the Alzheimer's Association, which obviously not the same, but it is any dementia caregiver, any person with dementia can call 24 hours a day if you just need to kind of talk through things with people. And then there's a lot of YouTube channels with just really good videos now that kind of walk through some of the things that we've talked about. Teepa Snow is, I think, one of my favorite dementia trainers. She has some great videos. So all just resources for you to be able to look into when you just want to explore more ideas. And then I talked about FCA already because flipped it to the beginning. And then again, if you're anywhere in California, caregivercalifornia.org is the statewide site. And that's it. And I will open it up to any questions or comments anyone has.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Christina. That was excellent as always. And you know, I'm sure you remember the outhouse caregiver is part of the Brain Support Network group, and that's a very memorable anecdote.
It's one that is stuck, and I feel like it's one that just makes so much sense around behaviors that people are like, what is that? And it's like very logical.
Indeed,
for
indeed.
that person.
Well, let us know if anybody in the room has questions. Hold up your hands and somebody will come around picking up cards. And the virtual attendees, please fill out questions online, and somebody in the back of this room will fill out a green question card and we'll get some questions going. And I don't see our lunch yet, so we may keep the questions going. And Kathleen, you may be coming back for questions if we have, because we still have a long list. Okay, have a question here. How does one not dissolve into infantilizing the care receiver, especially with the spouse, especially in the case of spouses caring for caregivers?
And that's so important because, you know, a lot of the things that we talk about around dementia is how do you simplify things? How do you shorten statements, simplify tasks and activities? And that's often what people think about with kids. And it's like, well, yes, and this is not a child. This is a person who's an adult who has the full experience of having been an adult. Even when people have lost a lot of their short-term memory and they may not remember exactly what their job was or where they worked, like even in those scenarios, there's still the feeling of I have been an adult. I have been in control of my life and in charge of my life. And so we can simplify things without it becoming infantilizing them. So some of it is just the tone of our voice, that I'm not going to talk to you like this and be like, oh, Robin, it is so nice to see you. But it's just like, hey, it's good to see you. You know, we can talk in the same way we would talk, but I'm not going to give you the whole long explanation and story. I'm going to maybe do it in little short chunks, but I'm still going to have the same tone of voice that I normally would. Now, if my tone of voice tends to come across as more angrier, then I might want to change that. But it is still the same way we would talk to any other adult. But if we're heading out the door, I mean, say, hey, Robin, we're about to leave. And I'm going to wait, give her a second to kind of think about that and process it. Can you go grab your shoes? And then wait for her to come back. Okay, so let's both grab our jackets and then we're going to go. And so I'm going to do kind of step by step, but I'm not talking to her as if she has no clue what a shoe is. Even for people, again, later stages where they might need really more cue by cue help of how to do things, we still can, what's our tone of voice? What's our facial expression? How are we talking to them? It's not like, let's put on your shoes. It's, can I help you with that? You know, can I give you a hand? You know, here's your right shoe. I'll go grab your left one for you. We can say it in the same way we would normally, but we're just breaking it down for somebody. So a lot of it comes down to our tone of voice, our facial expression. You know, we often talk with dementia that we do kind of want to get down onto someone's level because and I hope I'm not blocking wherever the camera is. We want to make sure that they're seeing us, acknowledging us, but that is still different than I'm going to kind of tower over you as if you were a child. And oh, look at how cute you are. No, I'm still going to talk to you, but I want to make sure I'm doing it on your level where you can see me and I know you're hearing me.
I'd like to switch the subject to dealing with hallucinations and delusions. And in our support group, Lewy work group, is a long time ago, somebody raised the question of their family members saw bugs, and how they dealt with the bugs is they one day got a spray bottle of water and put a sign that said bug killer on it, and then they went around and where do you see the bugs here, let me spray them. Yes, this is a #1 bug killer here.
Yeah.
Do you have some other examples of people in your community who have dealt with hallucinations or delusions and trying to enter their reality, which is so challenging?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of them, I remember somebody where it was kids and it was like around dinner time. And so it was like, oh, well, let me have them come in so that I can make sure that they're eating dinner, as opposed to it's time for them to go home. It's, well, no, we need to make sure they eat. So let's go get the kids and let's have them come in and we're going to feed them. And so we talked about different ways, and I can't remember exactly what they ended up trying, but it was just, you know, kind of a reminder of, you know what, everyone's got dinner taken care of. Everyone needs to go home. I think she tried initially saying, oh, I didn't make enough for anybody else. And it was like, that did not go over well with kind of the mom who was like, no, you have enough, you better have enough food for whoever is coming to the house. So it's like, that one didn't work. But it was like, no, they have dinner plans already. Parents are expecting them at home. We don't want to take over. They've made food. We don't want to like interfere with what their plans are. And then it was also, okay, let's try and kind of say that and be like, but let me make sure. I'm going to go confirm, I'm going to make sure everyone has food. And if anyone does not have dinner plans, then we'll have people come in. But can you go check on things in the kitchen, make sure it's all ready, and then I will let you know if there's anyone that doesn't have dinner plans. And so that's a way you could try it, but it's that kind of creativity, really, in some ways, that improv skills of you might try one thing and they're just like, no, we cannot not feed people who are at our house. We must give them dinner. And so having to shift and be like, okay, well, how do I do that differently? Yes, we want to make sure they're fed, but maybe it doesn't have to be me. They've got plans at home. They've got somebody waiting for them. We don't want to worry other people.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. How do you identify the signs that it's time for the person with Lewy body dementia to receive a level of care beyond home?
There is no one right answer to this. It really depends on what the available help is and how you're doing. So we often think about what are the symptoms or signs that I'm looking for in the person with dementia. And it's like, yes, let's look at those, because it might be that their needs cannot be met safely in the home. They're having trouble managing the stairs and you don't have a bathroom downstairs or place for them to sleep. Well, okay, we can look at different home modifications, or maybe that's not an option. Is their behavior such that it is affecting your health and your well-being? So sometimes caregivers will say, well, no, I want to take care of them at home as long as it is safe for them. And it's like, okay, but also what is safe for you? How is this affecting your health and your well-being? And if you have more options for help and support, you might feel like, well, we can manage this because maybe I've got multiple family members who can help, or we're able to bring in-home help, or we've used an adult day program. And so that's giving me time and space to take care of my well-being. And so we can do that. For other people, it's, I can't sleep through the night ever because they're up constantly. And then I'm tired during the day. Maybe there's medical needs that have increased, again, safety concerns. So it really depends on the situation, but it's okay to say, this no longer feels like a safe reality for me, versus just for the other person. So you kind of want to look at both. Like, are we able to manage what their needs are in a way that feels safe and comfortable without affecting my own physical health as well?
Okay. How should a person with dementia, with Lewy body dementia, ever be left at home alone? If they're having a good day, is an hour or two acceptable to go get exercise or run errands or take a break?
This so depends partly on the day, but really also on the stages, because of the fluctuations of cognition. You could be saying, well, it looks like a really good day today, and an hour later it could change. But if you kind of know in general where somebody is in terms of their abilities, how their thinking is, then you can kind of make that determination. Would they know what to do in the case of a fire or an earthquake? Would they know how to call for help? Would they know whether they need to get outside? Are they able to do those things? Are they trying to cook and might not remember that they turned the stove on? Again, you can make some home safety modifications to deal with some of that stuff, but those are the things you want to look for. Is, would they know what to do even in their the parts where they're not doing as well right now? So like, what's the worst that I've seen lately? In those moments, would they still be able to do these things? Then it's probably safe. There are some people who they have no other help. There's no family. People are not able to afford in-home care. And they're like, well, I need to go to the grocery store. Kind of, what do I do? We talk about kind of ways to kind of lower the risk and how do you keep the home safe and kind of what do you do? There's not always a perfect scenario. You could be in the bathroom and something can happen. You can't necessarily be with somebody all the time. So you want to make sure you're doing things that keep the home safe, keep them safe as possible, and know that it is never going to be 100% perfect. So as much as I say, think about kind of the stage and overall where they are, there's also things that are going to happen and you are going to do your best to keep them safe. And it does not mean it's always going to be perfect.
Okay, how do you handle delusions that involve the spouse having an affair?
Yeah, having an affair, or like you're going off somewhere and you're leaving me. Again, this is where, if that's a really firmly held belief and depends on where they're at in their stages, you might have a slightly different conversation. So somebody who maybe has a little bit more awareness, they know a little bit more of this seems wrong, but you keep leaving the house and I keep seeing you talk to that neighbor over there, and where are you going? You might say, I love you, I care about you, I would never do anything. I would never, cheat on you, I would never leave you, I really care about you. For somebody who this is a super fixed belief, in that moment, we may not be able to do a whole lot because that is what is in their head in that moment. But we really want to kind of, when they're maybe out of that delusion a little bit, to be able to then talk with them about, we're married, I love you, I care about you, I'm so happy to be here with you, and kind of reinforce that in those other moments. But depending again on the severity of the delusion, the stage of the dementia, you may not be able to really go there in the moment. They may not be able to hear it. That kind of just depends on the person. So in that moment, if you're saying, "Oh, I love you, I care about you, I only want to be with you," and they're like, "Nope, I know that that is not true, and there's nothing you was going to say that is going to change my mind," we're not going to win that argument. We're not going to change anything. So to just be able to, again, kind of give them that, "I love you, I care about you," and then you may need to just kind of give a little bit of space and then kind of come back in. Really hard to hear. That's one of the things, again, getting support, realizing that is a very common delusion. I don't know that everyone knows how common, because people don't really want to talk about that my spouse thinks I'm cheating on them. But if you can get into a caregiver support group, you will find that it's probably more common than you think it is. So really hard to hear and hard to deal with, and just depends on how fixed it is, kind of whether you can kind of have a conversation in that moment, or you just have to kind of make that connection again afterwards.
Yeah, it's really tough. Another related example in our support group was the person with Lewy body dementia thought that the spouse was a prostitute
Oh,
and didn't like that.
yeah.
Maybe some spouses would like that, but this particular one didn't like that, and that was very hurtful for the spouse. Very, very challenging situation.
And those are the pieces where, I don't want to say, oh, that's not a problem for the person with dementia, because obviously that is a problem for them. They're not happy about it. But kind of how we think about how we respond to it. Are we responding to it based on their feelings, or are we responding to it based on our feelings? And not to diminish what your feelings are. It's like, yes, that is hurtful. That is sad. There's a lot of grief, I think, that comes with that as well. So you want to get that support for yourself around your feelings, but when we're dealing with it in the moment, that we're responding to it based on their feelings, because that's where we're more likely to have an in. Not that, how could you think that of me? I would never do that. Again, that's their belief in that moment. That is what is real to them.
Okay. Oh, excuse me. If you could write it down, Bushan, that'd be great. And we'll do it that way. Thank you so much. Elena, could you come get Bushan's card? Or I have another one here. So for an advanced person with Lewy body dementia, the family is hired in-home care, and the person with Lewy body dementia is rejecting the in-home caregiver, and basically keeps firing the person. How do you handle something like that?
That's a really common one, actually, across a lot of types of dementia. Different ways that you might try. One, if they keep firing them, do they remember that they're firing them? So how much of the memory loss is a problem? The more memory loss, in some ways, the easier it is to deal with, because they may not remember that they fired them so many times. If there's a little less memory loss and they kind of remember, no, I told you to leave. Like, why are you coming back again? Sometimes, use the doctor. Can you get the doctor to write something down and say, this person is coming out kind of for your healthcare and for your monitoring. It's covered by your insurance, and they need to be here for this long. Often, once you can get somebody used to having in-home care, like, they'll adjust to it. So you have to get through that first period where there's someone new, there's a stranger, there's a person I don't know in my house, in my space. kind of just sometimes sitting there and staring at me. So you kind of have to get through that period. So sometimes can it be a doctor's order? Can you have that written down even from the doctor that the home care is coming in? It's also how we introduce it. Sometimes introducing the person as a friend. This is somebody who's coming over. They're coming to help me out a little bit around the house. That can be a way to do it. Or if you know that there's something that your loved one really likes to do. There was a family I was working with, and there was some card game. I don't remember what it is, but their mom really liked that card game. They actually found a home care worker who knew how to play that game, because then they could come in and, start a game all together, and then they could leave, and that home care worker could be there and continue that. And that was a way to kind of engage their mom without it being like, we're hiring somebody to come in because you can't be safe at home anymore. It was more based on kind of activity and a connection with that person. And that worked really well. So if it's somebody who likes to go for walks or likes to cook, they're going to come in and do these things with you. Or again, it's a medical order. You have to have that in-home help. It's a friend. Some people are more comfortable with it's like a house cleaner and it's someone coming in to do that. And then they just happen to be doing more, personal care or companionship as opposed to cleaning. So you might just have to try different ways. But if they're firing the person, some people say, well, I can't do anything about it. It's like, well, are they angry and agitated in that moment? Or it's just like, no, I don't need you. You should leave. Can that person leave for a little bit? Can they say, you know what, I will get in trouble if I leave right now. So I need to stay for, just a little bit longer. And then, I'll let them know. And that might kind of buy you some time in that moment. But if they're just really like, you need to get out of my house and I'm going to kind of push you out, then, that's a slightly different response where you kind of do have to let them leave in that moment. So if you're hiring in-home help, you generally want to try it a couple times when you're still there to see like, how is this going to go? Do I need to kind of introduce this person a little bit differently?
Okay, a couple more questions have come in. Somebody says, my husband asked me the same question over and over and over again. Do you have any tips for what I can do to cope with that situation?
Repetitive questions are hard because for the person, that is the first time they think they are asking it. Like they do not remember asking you before. So if we just say, well, I've answered that already, it's like, no, you didn't. If I were to come over and ask you a question and you just walk away, I'm going to be like, what is wrong with her? And you're just like, well, no, you've asked me that 10 times already. So just kind of that remembrance of this is the first time for them. Does not mean it's not still frustrating and annoying. But think about like, well, why is this coming up so much right now? Sometimes the repetitive questions are about something that's going to happen soon. So if we tell somebody ahead of time, Mary's going to come for a visit or we have a doctor's appointment tomorrow, someone may not always remember exactly what's happening or when it's happening, but they know something is happening. And so that's often a reason we start to get some of the repetitive questions. For others, it's just, it kind of comes to mind, and it's often more when somebody doesn't have anything to do. So if we can get them engaged in an activity, kind of distract them and redirect them into something else, that can help. Does not mean it won't eliminate it, but maybe rather than getting a question every 5 minutes, maybe you at least can buy yourself 30 minutes if you're able to kind of get somebody engaged in something else. Again, you might think about, is this the same question? Is there a reason why it's coming up? Some people will try notes if it's something in particular, and they, again, depending on the person, that may or may not work, but it's always worth a try. But if it's the same questions, you really want to think about, what is it about that question? Can I share information in a different way that might kind of sink in for somebody? But a lot of times there's some anxiety, there's some just loss of, I don't quite know what's going on. So the more we can kind of keep people busy, engaged, the more helpful it is.
Do you find that some people I know have whiteboards or some kind of a note system? Do you find those are very helpful to people?
Whiteboards and notes, for some people, it can work really well. But again, you have to kind of pay attention to it. You have to know that it's there, read it, and be able to understand what you're reading. So depending on the stage of dementia, and then also just how it's affecting that individual person, sometimes that works really well. I think particularly earlier on. For other people, not at all. I mean, again, outside of dementia, I stick a Post-it note on my computer sometimes, and if it's there for too long, I stop paying attention to it and it doesn't work anymore. So I think that can be true again with dementia, but it's always worth a try because it's a very simple solution to try. And if it works, then fantastic. It just may
Great.
not work forever.
Thank you very much, Christina. I see our lunch here, so we'll end here. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.